So I just want to say again, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming to this Transgender Day of Visibility event. So this is Trans Folks Who We Are, which is a panel discussion among 6 fabulous folks. And my name is Valerie Overton. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm co-chair of Lex Pride, which is co-sponsoring this event. Before we get started, I'd like to let you know 2 things. First, this session is being recorded. And second, if you would like to see closed captions, please click on the CC live transcript option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're using a small screen, you might need to click on more or the 3 dots to see the live transcript option. Also, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of Indigenous peoples on which we are meeting this evening. Even though we are meeting virtually, we are people who live, work, learn, play, or visit on this land. It is important to acknowledge the land because we typically talk about Indigenous peoples and their struggles in the past tense. We honor the Indigenous peoples who stewarded this land in the past and continue to work for justice today. As an activist, I commit myself to the struggle for Indigenous rights and self-determination, work that is essential to social justice. And now, I am delighted to introduce our panelists. In alphabetical order, they are Krysta Petrie, she, her. Krysta is an engineer, singer, maker, crafter, tinkerer, woodworker, and all-around nerd. She lives in Greater Boston with her wife, Katie, dog Porter, cat Steve, and 2 sugar gliders. She holds several identities: transgender, queer, sapphic, and feminist, among others. London LaRue, she, her. London is a cosmologist and mental health advocate. She holds several identities, including woman and Black mixed race. Mateo Emanuel Alejandro Rojas, he, him. Mateo is a 3rd grade Jewish Shule teacher at Boston Workers Circle, where he teaches children about social justice and connections to Jewish history and culture. He is also a volunteer survival English teacher at Eastern Service Workers, a suicide prevention speaker, and an assisted living community concierge, and an activist for social justice. He enjoys participating in activities at his synagogue and playing with his sweet service dog, Tilly. Mateo holds many identities that have shaped his life in activism: Indigenous, transgender, bisexual, autistic, disabled, Jewish, and Latino immigrant from Paraguay. Noah Sting Osborne, they, he. Noah is a speaker, activist, member of Lex Pride's board of directors, Rainbow Artist program organizer and facilitator, and art therapy student at Lesley University. Noah holds several identities: Black, Crow, disabled, trans, non-binary, and queer. Parker is not yet with us, but will join shortly. Parker is a speaker, cosplay aficionado, and architecture student at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Parker holds several identities as well: Japanese American, Italian American, and trans, non-binary, agender. I will be moderating this event as the proud parent of a transgender young adult. To start, each of our panelists will tell their story. Then we'll have some conversation about transgender journeys. We'll start in alphabetical order. So Krysta, would you please go first?
Hello, everyone. Excuse me. Hello, everyone. My name is Krysta Petrie. I am a Massachusetts native from Leominster. Now I live in Waltham with my lovely wife and my pets, as Valerie said earlier. I am an engineer. I went to WPI. I am currently a software engineer. But my trans story sort of maybe a bit stereotypical in some ways, but when I was a kid, you know, puberty hit me real hard, and it was not great. And the first inklings of anything was the shame I felt after doing arts and crafts to make myself look feminine in the bathroom when no one was home, and the fear of being found out and stuff like that. And, you know, things surrounding that. And over, you know, I always sort of was unhappy with my appearance all through school. And I sort of pushed it down, and it all sort of came to head in college while I was, you know, away from family for the first time. We had a drag party, and it was one of those times where I got way too into it and, you know, fell asleep with everything on, you know, with that wish that it would stay that way. And of course it didn't. And that happened again. And eventually I finished college, and it was a really rough time for me. I didn't care about my appearance at all. It was like really, I let myself go really hard, and it wasn't good. And then I, you know, tried to, after I graduated, force myself to, you know, like bow ties and dress up nice, and it you know, it didn't really work. And with the fear of never finding someone if I, you know, was trans or something, I put out a OkCupid that said that I was into like costumes and stuff, which I am also. And I eventually found my current partner, who I was happy to see was bisexual at the time. After that point, it was still like I resigned to the fact that I was a cross-dresser behind secretly and things. But then, you know, there were all these instances where it came up again and again, like first Halloween at work, where it was a social experiment and there was a trans person there that I got the okay with for that. And then it happened again. And then eventually I finally admitted to myself, after much denial and daring myself to keep stepping over the line more and more, I admitted to Katie while we were laying in bed one day that I think I was trans, and I wanted to do something about it and unify my identity, as it were, instead of having two distinct closets in my house, start making those closets one closet. And then that slowly progressed over time at work. Then I got a new job and everything reset a few years. And then, you know, it kept coming out like this. And then eventually it came out to my parents, and it did not go well. And my dad basically said that his heart was hurting, and like he was mourning, and he was telling me to get clean and get off the drugs being like hormonal supplements, etc. And kept sending me detransition stories. And I realized how far he went down the rabbit hole in the wrong way. And eventually, after he kept sending these things to me, I just told him to F off. And then I haven't talked to him since 2016. And luckily, I was able to rekindle things with my mom, but I've tried very hard, and it's been tried very hard to rekindle that relationship. And, you know, tried to contact many times, and he just doesn't want anything to do with me now because his son is dead, and he doesn't know who I am, etc. So that's you know, that's the sob story really in this, that I lost him and I lost several other people in my family. But, you know, on the other side, I have Katie's wonderful family, and some people in my family are very supportive. But it's always hard to lose the few people that you've looked up to your entire life and, you know, sort of modeled yourself after in a lot of ways. And then just to come to realize that they're kind of crummy people. So that's been like my source of depression and anxiety and all that sort of stuff over the past few years. And it's taken me a long time of just like not having that, to finally be okay with not having that. Just suddenly, for that reason and many others, people just disappeared in my life. But luckily, I have my wonderful wife now. We got married. My dad did not come to the wedding, but we had a wonderful wedding, and I've been out at work for since 2016, and yeah, I have gone through some, you know, medical transition things as well. I won't elaborate too far, but yeah, and dealing with, you know, insurance is a real pain in the butt. Let me tell you, they are not designed for this stuff, and a lot of these things are outpatient, and you know, you can't. They don't know how to deal with this sort of stuff working with insurance. So yeah, it's a real heck of a time. You know, and then, you know, Trump became president, and then there was this whole name project to get all of your documents in order, because everyone was fearing that you wouldn't be able to do these things like change your birth certificate and stuff. So I luckily was able to work with some lawyers at Ropes and Gray pro bono to help me get through that, and that was great. Yeah, so I don't know. That's pretty much it. I'm in a pretty good place right now. I live in Waltham. I have a lot of great friends. I haven't lost many friends. I have a growing family of queer people. Oh, and one other thing. In the past 2 years, me and my partner started the Little Queer Library in Waltham. And it's a little free library that focuses on queer and intersectional books. You might have seen it in the news lately because someone was taking our books and under dubious circumstances in mass, and yeah, it's got a lot of media coverage. But we luckily, through the support of the community, the local community, we've raised $7,000 in donations so that we can keep providing these books, and we've been sending these books all around the country and donating to local libraries lately. So that, and to the local school system. So that's been a great outcome from that kind of annoyance.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's
Krysta.
a big rambling thing.
Thank you so much, Krysta. I really appreciate your willingness to share your story, because like the themes that you bring up around kind of discomfort and denial and anxiety and navigating kind of relationships with family and friends are such threads that our community has to deal with. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'd just like to remind people, if you're not a panelist, if you could turn off your camera so that we can focus on the panelists, that would be great. And next in alphabetical order is London. London, would you please share your story?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I'm London. I grew up in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, and I went to a lot of like the Brookline school systems and all that jazz. And I had a pretty good like childhood for the most part, but like with my journey, it was more like the evolution of London. And I just remember like when I was in middle school and stuff, like I was kind of like questioning, like I always knew I was like different. Like I never really like fit in with like the boys or like the girls, but I always got along with like girls more than boys and stuff. And I just remember in middle school, like I was like experimenting with makeup because my mom, she was a photographer. She did a little bit of like modeling and stuff. And I just remember like how she kind of like introduced me to makeup in some ways because she had this like really old like rickety makeup kit, and she was like into fashion. She had like a lot of like 90s style like fashion magazines, so I was just like always into it, where it just brought the curiosity to me. And I remember I was severely bullied. Like middle school was rough, but fast forward like getting into high school, that's where I started experimenting like with makeup and stuff. Like my mom taught me how to put on eyeliner like the proper way on my waterline. Like I did all types of like crazy stuff with me. I was like getting into it. And I remember when I came out to her as bi and stuff, like she was so supportive and just like so happy. And it's like she always kind of knew that like I was in like the community, or just like knew I was different, but she wanted me to like just say it instead of just like saying like, oh, you're this or that, just like waiting for me to come out of my shell. And it's like either way, she just loves me unconditionally. And when I came out to her, this is something I will never forget. She threw a surprise coming out party for me with like cake, balloons, everything. And like some other family members who I mainly lived with, like it was just amazing. And it's something I will never forget. And I felt fortunate enough to like have such a loving family compared to a lot of my friends where they were just dealing with like all types of harshness, which really like saddened me. And I remember getting like I was severely bullied like by the guys, like they tormented me hardcore, like humiliated me, said all types of stuff. And then like by sophomore year, that's where I was like, oh, I'm gonna go by London. Cause like I just felt like that always suited me than like my other name and stuff, but that doesn't matter. I'm London. Hi. But it's just soon as I started going by London, a lot of people were just like, oh, you're just doing it for attention, this and that. And I'm like, no, I'm not. It's like, I know who I want to be. So that's where like London started, was like in the making. And then junior year, like no, sophomore year was like the hardest year. Like back in like 2016, like my sophomore year, I was excluded like from the GSA. Like all of the GSA members were so, I would not all of them, like I will say like 80% of them were like really awful towards me. And then like when you think of like going to a GSA and stuff, you think it's like a safe space for you to like feel like you can fit in when you feel so out of touch with like mainstream and stuff. But it was run by a lot of like cis straight people who thought like their way was like the perfect way. And I'm like, no. And it's like, here you are like advertising, like, oh, like we're so welcoming, but yet you picked on like people who were like different or didn't like fit your standards of what like an LGBT role model should look like. And it's like everyone's unique in their own way. And I would say like by senior year, that's where I definitely knew who I was and stuff, where it was like at the beginning stage of just like, all right, this is me, this and that, and I'm London and I'm proud. And then like after going to hair school and stuff, that's where I felt more comfortable with who I was, where like I just like flourished. And then everyone who like bullied me and stuff, they, or the ones who tormented me, they're just like, oh, hey, London, how's it going? Like, you look so good. And then I just give them that look like, we're not cool. After what you did, it's like, boy, sis, like goodbye, like no. So, but it's like till this day, I'm still happy with who I am. And it's just, I may deal with like struggles here and there. And I mean, that's life. It helps you become like a stronger person. I mean, that's how I look at it. I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm just grateful to like still like be here today and still have an amazing, like loving family. I've gained so many like new friends, like new connections, new friends. And even the pandemic, like, yes, I know it was rough for everyone, but it's like, I spent a lot of time actually focusing on myself. And I picked up like fitness as a hobby during the pandemic, dropped over 96 pounds. And I'm just, I can honestly say this is like the first time where I've like actually know what pure happiness feels like. And I just want people to know that like it, no matter where you are or like whatever struggles you're going through, like there's always a greater outcome to everything. It's like, just have faith. And then I know it's easier said than done, but like hang in there and stuff. And then realize like who your true, like just like who your true friends are. And then there's a lot of amazing people out there. And it takes a lot to like find your own tribe. So that's like pretty much my story.
Thank you so much, London. I just love, like you both, sharing of yourselves, and it's a journey, right? Sometimes people think of coming out as a one and done activity, and it is such a journey. And I so appreciate your kind of having that experience of joy and sharing that with us, and that it can be really hard times, and you can have those times of joy. So thank you so much. Mateo, would you go next, please?
Of course. Hello, everybody. I really appreciate everybody having me here tonight, along with these lovely panelists. It is really hard to condense my story, but I'll absolutely do my best. It's what we need to do. But I will say one of my favorite quotes, and it might sound tacky starting off with a quote, but hear me out, is just when the caterpillar thought the world was over, it became a butterfly. And that is something that I really strongly identified with, because that's really what my life was, of just not really knowing where I fit, feeling like everything was ending, I was losing more than gaining. But in time, I finally found what was right. And I did take a lot of risks, but it was something that was absolutely worth it. So pretty much, almost like I think Krysta mentioned earlier, almost stereotypical, right? It starts off with the typical narrative in some ways that, I just felt like I was a blue crayon wrapped in a pink label, that everybody was expecting me to act pink, right? I mean, the pink analogy, people think I'm very ladylike, and that, like, why do you want a boys' cake? Why? Well, that's a boys' activity, or like, why are you hanging with other boys? You have to be in the girls' team now. They can't be in the boys' team, because when the teachers would want to split us up in class to groups, I'd always want to go with the boys. And people didn't get why, so it was always those little things. But eventually it grew deeper than that. I'm bisexual, and so I always assumed that gender and sexuality were kind of the same thing, because I didn't have access to that education of learning that they were different. So I always blame my masculinity on me being bi, but me being open about being bi, especially in even middle school, got me chastised in a lot of ways of just really relentless bullying, whether it was in sports, if I would get too close to another athlete, say, oh, they're flirting with me, or petitions to get me kicked out of the locker room, which ended up working, petitions to get me kicked off teams. I mean, just relentless emails to my parents saying, have them stay away from my kid. I mean, it was pretty bad. And that's a very watered down version of it, of the bullying that I received. But in time, I started to figure out, like, something's not right, but I just didn't have the language. And this is why right now I actually teach a social justice program for kids. And I tell them, like, the kids, they know something's has not even say something's different, but something they know their identity. They just need to name it. It's just our job to give them the tools to do that. And so I think that would have really changed the outcome for me if I had access to that. But every direction, it was banned for me to even mention that I was bi at one point in my IEP. And they had a behavior plan saying if I mentioned it, that I had to be given a detention because that was inappropriate. Anything really inappropriate.
And so over time, I started to learn like my place. You know, I tried to be more feminine, and just no matter what I did, it wasn't working. If I even dressed as most beautiful girl in the court, it just wouldn't work. It just, because I didn't feel that way, and it caused a lot of dysphoria, and it only agitated my mental health challenges that I had that I've been open about. Now I work in suicide prevention, and I tell a longer version of my story. But I have been hospitalized 41 times, and I'm only 27 years old. So that's a lot growing up and feeling like that I just had no other way out. I had nowhere else to turn. My parents weren't validating about it. I didn't know anybody else that was like me, even bi, especially somebody that was trans that just wasn't in my town growing up. And not saying that trans people don't exist in my town, but people weren't out and visible about it. And that's why trans visibility has been so important, which I'll get to in a minute. You know, I was open about being bi, but I just didn't know all know about being trans. But when I finally got to college, there was a GSA, and finally I was in a situation where I could learn about all these things without having to worry about, am I going to get punished? Is anyone going to find out? Because I was an adult, I could drive there. And I really am adamant, this is why we need to give resources to kids where they can have access to that instead of having to wait till the college, because going to college in itself is a privilege to be able to even have access to those spaces. But I started to learn it, and over time, I'm like, hey, that sounds like me. But I was like in denial, like, no, not me. But then I hear another thing, like, that sounds like me. I'm like, but no. So I kept pulling back. But eventually it was inevitable. I'm like, you know what? I'm a trans man. This is what it is. And this is something that I have to decide now, like, because I was graduating in May 2017. And when I was going to become a counsel, I'm like, do I come out now so I can just go into my new job and know that they're an LGBTQ friendly place? Or will it confuse my students if I go in as my, you know, previous pre-transition self and then transition? I was trying to figure out when to do that. But I was also moving soon. So I was trying to figure out, like, well, do I do now face job housing discrimination, or do I find out if there's a safe place? So these were very big questions for me because I was running out of time since my parents are moving anyway. But also just in general, I did not have a safe home. So my parents were conservative. They were pretty aggressive with some of their views. And the transgender ban against military, like the trans military ban happened in 2017, and they were just ranting at the TV weeks before I was going to come out. And I was like, oh no, this is not going to go well. Not that I was surprised, but I was really disappointed that they haven't evolved since like the last few years we even mentioned the word trans in the house. But I was dating a man at this time, and I felt that he needed to be the first person to know, because, you know, I didn't know. It wasn't like I was pretending. I wasn't like I lied to him to get anything from him. I'm like, you know what? This is something I learned in the last year since we've been dating. I'm trans. I asked that you don't tell other people because I don't have a safe house. Within 24 hours, he outed me to 41 people, including all of my best friends. So that was really alarming. I was being bombarded with texts, a mix of very aggressive, nasty texts, and also, yeah, you. And I was just overwhelmed of not knowing what to do. So I was in a panic, and eventually I was like just torn because I'm adopted. So I have two families to come out to, an Indigenous family in Paraguay that I found in 2007. I was going to reunite with them within the next 3 weeks for the first time in my life. So like, this is the whole thing. Like, do I get to have my mother know me as her son instead as a daughter? So that was a big thing too. But with me being adopted, my adopted family always told me growing up, when they adopted kids, they said we wanted a boy and we wanted a girl. That was always a very strong point they emphasized. So I feel like a big disappointment. So my head was spinning in a billion different directions of what to do. But actually what happened was Charlottesville, Virginia, that was broadcast on TV of just neo-Nazis just running wild, and a young life was lost that day just to full-blown Nazism on American soil. And there was a lot of footage that was very distressing and traumatizing, but there was a lot of empowering footage too of the queer community, particularly trans people, who were standing in front of the KKK and just not backing down within all these vulgarities being thrown at them. And it clearly was abusive to see, but I just saw what cross solidarity can really do, and the power of being visible. And, you know, there was just, I felt that there was a shift happening, especially with Trump leading and a lot more aggressive anti-trans policies coming out. And I figured, like, you know what, I'm vice president of GSA, I just graduated, but like going forward, I'm going out into the world now. This could be something that I could help other people by coming out as trans, and this is the time. So when Boston had their big, it was like a week after, I don't know how many people were in Massachusetts at this time, but there was the big rally with 40,000 people when a smaller anti-LGBTQ and racist group came up to Massachusetts, and we just swarmed them. And it was that moment I just knew it was the right time. There was a gentleman who had a big Star of David queer flag, was rainbow, it was beautiful and hand sewn. And I went up to him, I'm like, hey, can I film my coming out video in front of your flag? And he was very emotional, overwhelmed, and he said yes. So I said the words that set me free. And so from there, that was something that was very powerful and felt very liberating. I was crying, my friends were hugging me. But then I had to go home and be like, okay, now I got to tell my parents, what am I going to do? So I told my mother in the car, and she kind of did the whole, like, I'm going to say the right words so I can say the right words, but then later on not actually follow up with those words of like, well, you know, we sensed something was wrong, but then later on they just denied all of it. Where my father was very quiet, very nasty about it. They said, we'll talk more about it when you come back from Paraguay. So I didn't know what that meant, but I went to Paraguay, reunited with my biological family, and their reaction was very mixed. They were needless to say, they're pretty upset about it, which was disappointing, especially with them being an Indigenous family with so many Indigenous cultures accepting already different genders. I was hoping that they would understand how much of the binary is rooted in white supremacy, but they just were not unable to see it because, unfortunately, they had a Portuguese priest come to their village about a year before I came and just converted them all to Christianity. So I was really upset about that if I came even just a year earlier, maybe it would have been accepted. But we agreed to stay in contact. Like they didn't disown me, but they still to this day still call me by my dead name. So that's very hurtful, but I'm hoping someday we can get there. But when I came back, my adoptive family said, I didn't raise a daughter. I didn't raise a son. I raised a monster. I want you out of this house. So like that, I had to strategize. I was posting everywhere in Queer Exchange Boston, like, hey, can somebody help me out? And actually I lucked out because a realtor saw it. And she messaged me at 1 in the morning, like, I'll help you out. So in time, we kind of scrambled. I finally found a place to live. And it was very scary and dealing with food insecurity. And unfortunately, the same month that I came out was the same month I became physically disabled. So I'm still, and you can't see me, but I'm actually in a wheelchair, partially paralyzed. So a lot of life changes were happening and I was getting that new job and unfortunately had to leave that job because of my disability. So everything was just like swarming in a mix of loss. And eventually I just stopped and like, you know what? I've lost everything. I've lost my job. I've lost my housing. I've lost my family. There's nothing I have, but joy might not come my way, but I have to create it. And now this is the time for healing and where I can find community. So I started searching for different like trans conferences or trans groups, whether it's virtual or whether it was in person, going to different community centers. And it was just really cool where I could really meet other people that were like me and hear their stories and start doing activism. So I'll turn off my camera for a second, but I don't know how many of you can see this if it's small, but this is the picture that went around the world when Jeff Sessions came to Boston and he announced that he was going to work on taking away transgender rights. So I took the trans flag that is behind me and it wrote not erased on it because this is when the hashtag not erased was going on, broke in there, dressed up as a Trump supporter and threw up the trans flag in his face yelling will not be erased. So it sounds very simple, but I got 3 sprains from Boston police that day. And it was a really rough recovery, but the amount of love I received from trans people around the world and cis allies really helped me find more spaces, more community, and realize I can actually make a lot of change. So since then, I've been doing a lot of different activism work of going into schools or doing things like this, something smaller and a smaller scale. So yeah, that's where I am now, is that I found community. I found wonderful friends. I'm living in a queer co-op and I'm happier than I've ever been.
Thank you so much, Mateo. There's so much in your story that I think resonates with everybody in this group in terms of, gosh, like all that you have to navigate to understand your identity and then navigate with everybody around you. And sometimes it's really harsh. And, we have people in all of our communities, we have hosted people who've been kicked out of their families, kicked out of their homes. And it is such a tragedy when people don't see the beauty in your humanity. But here you are, and thank you so much. Noah, would you go next, please?
Yes. Hi, my name is Noah Stang Osborne. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him, and I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and currently live in Cambridge. I've always been queer, but I didn't always have the language to describe my experiences. When I was younger, I knew that gay people existed, but I assumed that I couldn't be one. It was something that some adults did, but I didn't know any gay kids or teens. I definitely didn't know that you could be non-binary. I think that part of the idea that being gay was for other people came from conflicting messages from my parents. My mom brought me to one of the first legal gay marriages in Massachusetts when I was a toddler, and the groom have the first piece of cake. When I came out later, my family used to joke that that's how I turned out gay. My mom also showed me articles about transgender people. So when I was 5 and I repeatedly talked about marrying my best friend's older sister, my mom thought I might be a lesbian, but she didn't say anything. And when I was 7 and I found out I was going to go through puberty and develop breasts, my reaction made my mom think I might be trans. For a few months, I became obsessed with trying to make sure that I could either prevent my breasts from going in or remove them when they got here. And that was really stressful for me to think about my body changing in a way that I didn't want and would be extremely uncomfortable with. However, my bio dad wanted to be able to control any aspect of me possible, including my gender and sexuality. So when he made it clear that I was supposed to be a girl, I tried my best to be a girl. When it came to LGBTQ+ stuff, I was just an overly invested ally. That is until my friend asked me out when I was 13. I was at my mom's house at the time, and my first response was just to go, Mom, Amanda asked me out. And my mom didn't even look up from what she was doing. She just said, no dating till high school. And that was my entire sexuality coming out with my mom. But my mom was not an especially strict parent. So when she brought Amanda and I to the movies, she said nothing about my red roses and Godiva chocolates. Shortly after that, I was out to pretty much everyone in my life. I was out to my younger brother, my maternal grandparents, and the people at school with mostly positive results. The one person I didn't want to come out to was my bio dad. He had gay friends, but he told me that being gay is a choice and I need to make sure I make the right one. When he found out I had trans friends, he refused to use their pronouns and was very transphobic. Unfortunately for me, I was outed by my middle school guidance counselor. At the time, it felt like the end of the world, but I did survive, and a few months later, my bio dad lost custody of me for child abuse. My mom gained full custody of me at that time, and that would have been a time where I could have explored my gender identity a little more, but it still didn't feel safe to do so. I still carried the trauma of living with my bio dad part-time for 14 years, and I didn't feel safe to even look at that part of me. So I didn't, I was a lesbian, and that worked for a while. Eventually, I couldn't handle being called she anymore, and I couldn't handle people looking at me and thinking I was a girl. I didn't know exactly what I was, but I knew that I was not a girl and I was not going to be a woman. So I decided to come out as non-binary. It took me a while to figure out what pronouns worked for me. I started out using like she, they to ease people into it, and then I dropped the she pretty quickly. I used they, them for a while, and also used the neo-pronoun Z, which in my case I spelled XE, and now I go by they, he pronouns. This journey with my gender was one that I took my mom on, and she was really great through all of it. Even though when I was younger, she said I couldn't, remove my breasts, she is supporting me through top surgery and will be helping me recover, which I am extremely grateful for. I'm now out as non-binary, trans, masc, and queer in all aspects of my life, and I'm really lucky that that's safe to do so. Part of my journey around my gender has included, and my sexuality, has included LGBTQ+ nonprofit work. This includes speaking engagements like this, speaking on panels, and also running art groups for LGBTQ+ youth and allies. Most of the kids who come to my art groups are trans. For those groups, I invite LGBTQ+ guest artists to come to my groups so the kids that I work with can have the role models that I didn't have. I want them to be able to easily picture themselves as an adult and as comfortable in their own skin. I want the people who come after me to have an easier time coming out and coming to terms with who they are than I did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noah. And I think it is so wonderful that, many of you in your different ways are kind of working, well, just by sharing of yourselves, you're working to not just provide awareness to other people, but to be role models for younger people, which is so important. So thank you for that. And we do have one other panelist I know who's been having a little bit of trouble, but hopefully Parker can join us and speak. Parker, are you able to speak at this point?
I am literally like almost home. I'm in the elevator. My phone is still at 1%. I will be back in like 5 minutes, I
Okay,
promise.
all right, no problem. Yeah, whenever you're ready. So, it is, so important that we hear a lot of different kinds of stories, because the transgender community is so diverse, as is everybody else, right? I mean, we really try to avoid having the appearance that trans people are a monolith. And all of you kind of demonstrate that there are lots of different experiences, lots of intersecting identities that all impact your stories. And I think that one of the things that people often ask is, what can I do? How can I be an ally? And I'm wondering if any of you might be willing to just talk about what allyship means to you. Would anyone in particular like to get us started on that question? I could pick eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Mateo, go for it.
Yeah, so I think allyship can mean, is that what you said? What allyship
Yeah, go, yeah. I mean, how about you and then Mateo and London? I'm not sure if you were trying to speak also, so why don't we go in that order?
Sure. So for me, allyship is about, just kind of showing up and supporting trans people in the way they need to be supported. And that can vary greatly from trans person to trans person. Like, good basics are using their pronouns, using their preferred name, and using gender affirming language. But it can be really small actions that show lots of allyship. One example I think of a lot is when I was in high school, shortly after I came out as transgender, I had an event that I had to dress up for. And I had never been allowed to really dress up as something other than feminine. And I didn't know how to dress masculine because I didn't have all the items in my closet. And an adult in my life gifted me my first ever tie. And she was also part of the LGBTQ plus community. And that level of allyship coming from a cis lesbian to me as a trans queer person meant a lot. And I still have the tie.
I love that story. Thank you, Noah. Mateo, how about you?
Sure. I mean, this, again, it's going to vary from each trans person to each trans person, but I think generally, really just listening to our stories, but not just focusing on the trauma of it, but really investing in trans joy as well. By when you see someone just rocking it, whether it's enabling the person themselves, like they said, that tie story, but even on a bigger level, of advocating for them when they run into transphobia. But really a big part of allyship for me is holding your loved ones accountable, even if it's a friend, even if it's a family member. If they are talking in transphobic rhetoric, that's where they're going to listen to you. They're more likely to listen to you, unfortunately, than to listen to me. And they're going to be the ones that you can keep in check easier, because unfortunately I've run into performative allyship where people are great at using my name, people are great at using my pronouns, but the minute their best friend says something, like, why aren't you keeping them in line? Why are you putting more labor on me to have to constantly educate? So I really think standing up for us when no one's watching and it doesn't benefit you directly. Again, social media, that's great when you can write all these great things about trans, liberation, but it really matters what goes on at that dinner table. It really goes on, what matters when you talk in the bedroom, being like, hey, what's going on in the news? And you hear, right now with a lot of the conversation about Leah Thomas, a lot of true people's colors are showing about where they draw the line of where the trans people are seen as acceptable. And that should be on cis allies to really educate, because we're tired, y'all. We're very tired of having to explain all the time. So helping us out with education, but uplifting our voices when doing so.
Thank you, Mateo. I love that. Truer words. London, would you like to speak to that too?
Sure. I agree with what everyone is saying. And so I feel the exact same way, but how I view allyship is just creating just comfort and people who are sure of like how to express themselves, or if they feel like they're out of like mainstream or whatever the case may be. It's like just creating that like comfort where they feel like they're not alone in the world. They have like um amazing like support like from, yeah, just from like folks, even if it's like friends, or if you're close to like if you're close to like a selective group of family members. But also like I just feel like with allyship, it's just like people, as what everyone else is saying, like just educating themselves and being respectful and conscientious of what their pronouns are or the name that they want to go by and stuff. And also just like putting effort into like trying, instead of like coming up with so many excuses and saying like all types of, excuse my language when I say this, but all types of bullshit, because it drives me nuts when people are just like, well, it's an accident, or they come up with some sort of excuse. And it's like, no, you're doing this on purpose. And then that's where I like distance myself. But also, like I said, just finding just a good group of people. And I know it takes time, a lot of trial and error, but as I said, just don't like, I don't want people to like lose hope or anything, because there are like some good people out there. And it's just like they'll naturally like come to the stars universe, like they'll all align and stuff. But honestly, it's just try, even if it's all new to you, but like put in the effort so that way they'll feel comfortable to come to you, and make sure it's genuine, not like just bullshit where you're just like, oh, I'm trying, but yet it's like you're reverting back to the same BS that you've always been doing. So yeah, sorry if it seemed like I repeated myself.
No, I think that's wonderful. And I love, London, how you talk about creating a space of comfort, right? And I think part of that is not expecting the person who's coming out as trans or figuring out their identity to know exactly who they are. You know, it's a journey. And, you know, providing that comfort, part of that is allowing someone to evolve in their understanding of themselves.
Yeah,
And so I just love, you know, how you describe that. Thank you, London.
You're welcome.
So Krysta, if you want to say something, and then Parker's joined us. So after Krysta, I'd love for Parker to share their story.
Sure, just super quick with allyship. I know when people come out, and it's really hard, right? So making, if you're like a parent or a friend or a relative or whatever, the key thing is to not make it about you. And that's like the hardest thing, because it's like, this is so hard for, you know, them saying, oh, this is so hard for me, you know, look what you're doing to me. Like, it's hard for me to get this right and to be okay with this. And it's like, you should be supporting them. And if you have your own struggles, go talk to your own therapist about it. Because Lord knows I've talked to my own therapist. That's it.
Thank you. And that is such an important point, because, you know, about them. So now I'd love to welcome Parker. Thank you so much for making it, Parker. If you are able to share your story, we would just love that.
Yeah, thank you. I am so sorry I'm late. I am a second year architecture major, and I had a class, and I'm in Chicago right now. So my brain thought when we said 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, what time? When we said 7 o'clock, we meant 7 o'clock Central Time, and I don't understand how, you know, math works sometimes. Like, based on everything you've probably heard so far, being gay is hard. So me commuting and running back here is just part of the struggle. So honestly, it's hearing everyone else's stories was like very inspiring. I only heard maybe 3 because I was in class. But like, I feel like I'm a tad younger than some of the other people here. I'm only 20. But I would say like I haven't had a long enough life to say I've struggled immensely, but like, in my 20 years of life, there is enough to talk about that I am here. So I guess I'll talk about that. So my parents, they're both immigrants from very different countries. My mom is from like a small farm town in Italy, and my dad is from like kind of in the center of Japan. In like he moved around between cities and towns and stuff like that, but like he's from Japan, pretty conservative place. So I heard their stories about like traveling around, moving to the US, meeting each other, and like all the struggles with like language barriers and stuff like that. And I just knew I can't make their life harder. So when my parents started talking about how when they got pregnant with my brother, they made sure that they wanted a boy and a girl. That was what they wanted. And I was like, great, I'll be the girl, I guess. So because my brother's older than me, and there's only two of us, there's like this competitive spirit between us, except for he doesn't know that we're competing to be the best child. But I'm obviously the best. I'm winning. And so I guess my goal was just to be the best daughter. So I was trying to do the, feminine things. I was wearing all the dresses that my grandparents would send us for Christmas. I was, trying to grow my hair out long. It was not growing at all. I had like the most awful bangs in like early elementary school. And I just tried to do what I thought would make my parents happy. But as I got older, I realized, oh, that this isn't making me happy as much as I thought it would to make my parents happy. Immigrant child. And so I started to like discover what I wanted out of myself. And I had never really talked about sexuality or gender with anyone. But I was in like the 5th grade. We had just moved to France for a year because my parents were working. They're both physicists, so we went to CERN. And there I got bullied profusely. Kind of a common pattern with gay people. We always get bullied. There they were bullying me for like not knowing French, which I knew French. And also that I wasn't dressing like a girl, really. I wore a lot of jeans and like sweatshirts, and apparently that wasn't feminine. I don't know what era they were living in, but like it was not the 1900s. I was so confused by them. But like, that bullying kind of got to my head because I was a child going through like early stages of puberty. Of course, everything was going to get to my head. So I developed like a really bad anxiety disorder because of it. I was literally like waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get on the bus. I would eat my breakfast. I would immediately puke my guts out, and my parents would keep me home. So, I survived at least. But then I got back to the US for the beginning of middle school, and somehow everyone had learned about what gay people were. And it was a very interesting topic. So middle school girls specifically were very ready to flaunt their sexualities, which was confusing for me because I had missed that entire thing. So like every girl was like, yes, I'm bi, yes, I'm pan, yes, I'm a lesbian. And I was like, cool, sure, I'm gonna pretend I know what all that means. And so I never actually talked about my sexuality. I was like, well, boys are cool, I guess. They're a little gross. And girls are pretty cool. They're pretty, all that stuff. So I was just like, whatever, my sexuality doesn't matter. I'm probably gay. Who cares? So I kind of didn't think about it again until high school. So my freshman year, I actually met Valerie's son, Danny. in gym class. He's a year older than me, but we bonded. He adopted me. I was his small child, and it was great. I had a family already, and it was very gay. So he was probably the first trans person my age that I had met. And so it kind of gave me like the opportunity to start like digging into those random questions about gender and stuff. And he answered all of them because he's awesome. So around sophomore year, I had just gotten into a relationship with this guy I've grown up with. And let's just say his parents were also immigrants, but from China. So they were even more like against LGBTQ people. So when I started fighting with him about trans people and non-binary people, I realized that there is something there. And then after fighting with him, I felt a lot better. So I started fighting with my family about trans and non-binary people, which isn't the best way to take out my random frustrations about my gender, but I did. And eventually I was like, well, this is eye-opening for me. So I posted on my Facebook wall. No, was it my Facebook wall or my Instagram? There's something. I was like, I am non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. Okay, bye. And that was, our generation is a little bit nicer about people coming out. So I was getting all these messages and stuff like that. And I did not tell my parents for another like 2 weeks. And the way I told them was I texted them. And then I left for a day of like dress rehearsal. I don't remember what it was for, but I disappeared. Both of them texted me back being like, you're missing from the house, but we'll have a conversation when you get back. And as I mentioned before, they are immigrants and they grew up in very conservative households and stuff like that. So at first they were kind of confused, but they've been around American culture long enough that they're like, this is apparently a normal thing, but we understand none of it. So it's not like they were against it. They were a little worried when I tried to change my name because they were worried I was distancing myself from the family, which I wasn't. But they were supportive enough, and the more they understood, they like started to talk to me more about it. And my mom is now probably the biggest ally I know. She works at Brandeis as a professor, and she helps run the LGBT stuff at the college. And it's a very confusing thing for me that she is more of an ally than I am like gay. It's terrifying sometimes. But at like, high school went by, I made more gay friends. It was great. Danny is still my favorite out of all of my gay friends, I have to say. And I got more into, after meeting Valerie, I got more into like LGBT activism. Wow, words are hard. And so I started talking in panels like this. I helped run the GSA my senior year. I actually, after I started college, I became a mentor for a middle schooler who had just come out as non-binary. And I was mentoring them throughout the summer. Unfortunately, they have been struggling a lot more than I had been. So I would see them once in a while as they were in and out of like mental institutions and stuff like that. But I feel like being gay and getting the support that I did growing up really turned me into who I am. I am now like the mom friend. I take care of everyone. I advocate for LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. I am just very open and gay and stuff like that. And yeah, that's about it. I know it was long and I was a little rambly, but I'm gay. I'm not like saying, I'm not concise with anything I ever say. Sorry.
Thank you, Parker. And just to be clear, people use lots of different kinds of terminology and terms, and some people use gay to be an umbrella term for LGBTQ. And so Parker has a trans, non-binary, agender identity, and using gay is kind of like a all encompassing in all my queerness kind of way. So just to be clear about that. So I do want to acknowledge that we're just a few minutes over our time, and I just want to say that it is such a joy to have this conversation with all of you. I'd like to thank you, the panelists, so much for your courage and your honesty and your willingness to share your experiences. It is truly a gift to us all. Thank you so much. To everyone else who's watching this, my thanks for attending this session and for reaching into your hearts to engage with authentic transgender experiences. So thank you all so very much. Stay well, stay safe, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Everybody can go on camera if they want to do the wave goodbye. Bye, everybody.